In the vast expanse of the Caribbean Sea and the Eastern Pacific Ocean, a contentious war is underway, not one that most of the world anticipated. No, this is not a conventional war between nations. It is a military campaign aimed at stopping drug trafficking, but executed with lethal force on the high seas. Since September 2025, the United States military has carried out a series of at least 30 strikes on vessels alleged to be smuggling drugs, resulting in over 100 deaths. AP News. That is more than just a drug interdiction operation. That is a military offensive. And today we're going to unpack the story, from how it started, why it's controversial, who's involved, the legal and ethical questions raised, and what it could mean for the future of international law and U.S. foreign policy. The operation began quietly in early September 2025. Under the name Operation Southern Spear, U.S. military forces began launching airstrikes against small vessels suspected of drug trafficking in international waters off the coasts of Venezuela and Colombia. The administration then in power, led by President Donald Trump, publicly framed these strikes as part of a broader effort to disrupt powerful transnational drug cartels and prevent illegal narcotics from entering the United States. In a post on social media, U.S. Southern Command stated that these vessels were operated by designated terrorist organizations and traveling along known narcotics trafficking routes. The strikes weren't just naval interdictions or boarding operations. They were lethal missiles, drone attacks, and precision airstrikes military force used against human beings. By the end of December 2025, the U.S. military had conducted 30 known strikes on suspected drug-smuggling boats in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific, resulting in the deaths of at least 107 individuals. Video released by official sources shows small boats suddenly exploding, a sudden flash and blast, then silence. Bodies are lost under the waves. Often no names, nationalities, or identities of the people killed are released. The U.S. military claims these strikes are necessary to disrupt what it labels narco-terrorist networks, reminiscent of counterterrorism campaigns like those against Al-Qaeda and ISIS. But critics say this is something entirely different. One of the most contentious questions in this story is semantic. What, exactly, is a narco-terrorist? To this administration, the term refers to drug traffickers whose operations are so widespread and dangerous that they pose a direct threat to American lives. It's a label that blurs the line between criminal activity and armed insurgency. In some cases, groups such as Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan criminal gang, and other Latin American cartels have been classified by the U.S. as terrorist organizations. But even with these designations, the question remains, does a drug trafficker, operating at sea, justify a military strike that ends lives without trial? That's a question that lawyers, lawmakers, and human rights groups around the world are still debating. The first known strike in this campaign took place in September 2025. In that initial incident, the U.S. military struck what it said was a Venezuelan vessel involved in cocaine trafficking. 11 people aboard were killed. Later reporting revealed that after the first strike, survivors in the water were targeted again, allegedly because they were communicating with another ship. That second strike, targeting people already incapacitated, sparked intense controversy. U.S. military commanders justified this by suggesting survivors could still relay information or signal other traffickers. But critics, including international law experts, called it something far more serious. Under international law, launching military force outside of declared war is strictly regulated. The use of deadly force is generally reserved for self-defense or with explicit authorization from the United Nations Security Council. Yet the U.S. administration has categorized these drug cartels as participants in an armed conflict, a claim that many international law scholars reject. Human Rights Watch, among others, argues that drug trafficking is a law enforcement issue, not a battlefield conflict. Thus, using military strikes, which inevitably kill people, may violate international human rights law. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights even condemned the strikes as unacceptable violations and urged an immediate halt to the killings. The strikes have also strained diplomatic relationships. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro, whose government has been accused by U.S. authorities of facilitating drug trafficking, denounced the operations as attempts at regime change. Instead of reducing tension, This campaign appears to have escalated it. Meanwhile, U.S. lawmakers have demanded more transparency, especially after reports of follow-up strikes against survivors, pressing the administration for video releases and detailed evidence. One of the most haunting questions is, who are the people killed in these strikes? Most remain unidentified. Some may have been part of trafficking operations. Others may simply have been sailors, fishermen, or crewmen caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. We do not know their backgrounds. We do not know their stories. But every life lost, whether guilty or innocent, carries weight. And in this contentious campaign, the true human cost is hard to measure. It's worth noting that the U.S. has long combated drug trafficking at sea. The U.S. Coast Guard regularly interdicts smuggling vessels, stopping them, boarding them, and arresting traffickers, without lethal force whenever possible. In 2025 alone, the Coast Guard offloaded hundreds of thousands of pounds of illegal narcotics worth over $500 million after successful interdictions in the Eastern Pacific. These operations are very different from military strikes. They focus on law enforcement, arrests, and prosecution, not on lethal force. This contrast underscores the core debate of this entire campaign. Should drug interdiction be a law enforcement mission or a military war? In a startling escalation, the U.S. appears to have moved beyond maritime targets. In December 2025, President Trump confirmed that a coastal loading facility in Venezuela, allegedly used for drug shipments, was struck, potentially by the U.S. military or the CIA. This marks a significant shift, from targeting boats at sea to striking facilities on land. The details remain murky. The White House has not clarified who carried out the strike, what evidence was used, or what legal authority justified it. So where does this leave the world? The campaign shows no signs of slowing. With military leaders still in place and new commanders appointed to oversee Southern Command operations, the strikes may continue into 2026 and beyond. Yet, the legal, moral, and diplomatic controversies surrounding this campaign will not disappear quietly. Lawmakers, human rights groups, and foreign governments are watching closely and demanding accountability, transparency, and answers. Wars are not measured only in territory captured or enemies defeated. They are measured in lives changed, lost, and shattered. This campaign, on the surface a fight against drug trafficking, has raised deeper questions about how nations choose to wield power, how far they go to protect their own citizens, and what rules govern the use of lethal force in a world that is not at war. Is this a legitimate attempt to protect nations from the scourge of drugs? Or is it an unprecedented and dangerous expansion of military power in the name of national security? That, perhaps more than any strike, is the real story.